Welcome, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. We're delighted to have you here. My name is Lisa Rawlings, the President and CEO of the National Urban Fellows, and we're very pleased to have you join us today. If you could just take a moment and add your organizational affiliation to your name, that will just help us know who's in the room so we can engage in the conversation. So today is intended to be an intimate conversation, with our leaders in the philanthropic sector. And I'm so pleased that Don Chen, our partner, has agreed to help us host this event. And so at this moment, I'd like to invite Don to provide some opening remarks.
Thanks so much, Lisa. It is an honor to welcome you all and now I can see folks. Hey there. It's really lovely to see everybody on screen here. And Lisa, I'm very curious about your background. Is that a bunch of Post-it notes behind you, or is that just like really, really cool wallpaper? Anyway, you can tell me later. But I am delighted to welcome you all, and such an honor for the Surdna Foundation to co-host with NUF, as we affectionately call it. We're here for an important reason. I've learned through my long time affiliation and partnership with NUF that representation in the leadership of our sectors, nonprofits and philanthropy, is very lacking, because there's a severe lack of people of color in positions of leadership in organizations. We're talking about CEOs. And the National Urban Fellows program is designed originally 50 some odd years ago, designed, I think, just focused on government, if I'm not mistaken, because it saw similar deficits in the public sector and was instrumental in identifying wonderfully talented people, putting them through a program, enabling their leadership development and growth, placing them in key roles. And then, we've seen so much benefit from that, not just for the individuals who've gone through the program, but for our society, because different perspectives from people of color, people from different backgrounds, has really added a huge amount of value to the perspectives that folks in the public sector bring. So we hope to achieve that more and more in the nonprofit and philanthropic sectors as well. That's why the Surdna Foundation has been such a strong supporter of NUF over the years. This year we have 2 fellows who are absolutely brilliant, and we've had a couple of fellows going back more years than I've been here. And we always get so much value as a foundation out of that experience. And we like to think that our fellows also really get a lot of value from spending time with us and going through the program as well. So that's just a little bit about our relationship. Again, Don Chen, for those who are joining just now, Don Chen with the Surdna Foundation. And I think I'll take it back over to you, Lisa.
Thank you so much, Don. I'm also pleased to welcome our board chair, Mr. Miguel Centeno, to provide remarks.
Well, thank you very much, Lisa, and good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much, everyone, for taking time out of your busy schedules to be with us this afternoon. I am Miguel Centeno, proud chairman of the board of National Urban Fellows. This event actually started as an in-person gathering, but based on feedback, we converted it to a virtual gathering, and we're certainly excited that you have joined us. So, Don, a special thanks to you for your steadfast support of National Urban Fellows over the years. Surdna's support has been invaluable in sustaining our critically important work. Your support of today's convening is just the latest example of your collaboration and partnership. And I will say that we are proud to call Surdna a supporter and partner. I want to set the stage for today's discussion by underscoring, as Dr. King once said, the fierce urgency of now. Friends, as supporters and champions of underserved communities, and as committed as you all are in your daily work, to create a more equitable and just America. You know firsthand the challenges that exist toward our realizing a more perfect union. Our country is as divided as it has ever been, matched only by the years in which we were embroiled in a civil war. Our country is engaged in a new civil war, but one that is not necessarily played out in battlefields like Gettysburg. Today, the field of battle is in leadership of organizations and the opportunity that that brings to direct resources to desired communities and organizations. Friends, very plainly, BIPOC voices are terribly underrepresented in leadership of government, not-for-profit, and philanthropic leadership. We are not in the room where it happens. As a result, decisions are consistently made that are contrary to BIPOC community interests. Just yesterday, the U.S. House of Representatives selected as their next speaker an anti-choice extremist, election denier, and Trump lackey to a position that places him only behind the vice president in the line of presidential succession. The number of recent Supreme Court decisions that pull back on many hard-earned rights is just another example. The list, unfortunately, is long across sectors, pointing to that fierce urgency of now. The forces that oppose equality and social justice are well-funded, organized, and determined to implement their vision of America, an America that excludes BIPOC communities. We must be at least as similarly funded, organized, and determined if we are to prevail. That's why we've brought you together today. The racial reckoning that has taken place over these past few years has not resulted in all worthy organizations obtaining the support that they need. NUF is one of these worthy organizations with over 50 years of experience in BIPOC talent development that needs additional support. Our request is that if you currently support NUF, that you consider increasing that support. If you do not currently support NUF, we invite the conversation to start today to give you comfort to invest here. We want to share today why NUF is worthy of your support, and we look forward to our future collaborations and partnership. So now, I'd like to introduce Dr. Lisa Rawlings, President and CEO of National Urban Fellows, who's done wonderful work steering NUF through these challenging times. And a little later on, Gary Bagley, an esteemed member of our Board of Directors and Development Committee Chair. Dr. Rawlings will now lead an important fireside chat. Dr. Rawlings.
Thank you so much, Miguel. You have provided incredible leadership for our organization through this very dynamic time, so we certainly appreciate that. And to Don for all the support that you provided to the National Urban Fellows, not just through the check, but all of the ways in which you support our fellows, our organization, and our leadership. We certainly appreciate that. If you're just learning about the National Urban Fellows, just wanted to let you know we are an inclusive leadership incubator for the social sector. And as Miguel referenced, we've been doing this work since 1969. And like in 1969, the time couldn't be more urgent for all of the reasons that Miguel mentioned. And so we wanted to make sure that today that we can have a rich discussion about the future of the sector and how we can partner together to build it. We'll start with the fireside chat, followed by a discussion where we'll engage you in conversations. And as we begin, I just want to set the context with two thoughts. One is that we have a looming leadership crisis in this sector, and the second is that if we do nothing, we will perpetuate the inequities that we seek to eradicate. So when we think about this looming leadership crisis, there are several forces that are coming together that create a challenge for us as social sector leaders. And when I say social sector, the nonprofit, philanthropic community, but also the public sector. When we think about what's happening in society and the demands on the sector, we see increasing complexity with rapid proliferation of new technologies, of AI, of incredible demographic shifts, of socio-political shifts. We see threats to democracy that Miguel alluded to. We see efforts to further disenfranchise folks by preventing people from voting, by preventing votes from getting counted. We also see a rollback of many of the rights and opportunities that we have come to enjoy and take full advantage of, and that have been responsible for many of us being able to do the work that we do today. And then when we think about who is there to respond to these challenges, and we look at the talent supply, the leaders in the social sector, and what's happening in the leadership sector is that the leaders are aging. And that there's a report from 2012 that said in 5 to 10 years, 75% of nonprofit executives are expected to retire. That was 10 years ago, right? We're seeing the proliferation of nonprofits. Today, there are over 1 million nonprofits and foundations. So there's this incredible demand for talent, but there's a lack of investment in this talent. So we see some of the major concerns that nonprofit executives in particular raise about the fears and concerns around succession planning, as well as not being able to make the level of investments really required to prepare the leaders to take the helm. In addition to this leadership crisis, when we pair that with the historic and systemic inequities, we're on track to just continue to sustain a lot of the concerns that we're here to eradicate. As Don mentioned from the top, that BIPOC leaders are grossly underrepresented in the nonprofit sector, both in nonprofits as well as in philanthropy. But further, when the leaders are in charge, they get less money with more strings. So the challenge for BIPOC leaders is even more dire than what's happening across the sector. But we also know that much of the work that the nonprofit sector is engaged in disproportionately impacts communities of color. And so if we're not at the table and we're not in leadership roles, we really are not doing the greatest service to our work. And then because we get fewer dollars, we're able to invest fewer dollars in these BIPOC communities. And so this is a challenge that confronts us. But fortunately, this is not where our story ends. We know that deep, wide, and long-term investments to prepare diverse leaders can help counteract these forces. And so here to share their insights on this work, I'm really proud and excited to bring to a conversation our two leaders who bring their brilliance to the philanthropic work, but also have experience leading nonprofits. First off, I'd like to welcome Shauna Smith, who is the National Director of Community Mobilization at the Ballmer Group. And they're responsible, and there she's working on improving economic mobility to reduce racial disparities at scale through place-based partnerships. As well, I'd like to bring Cecilia Gutierrez, who is the Managing Partner and Portfolio Lead of the Place Matters portfolio at Blue Meridian Partners. And they work to transform communities across the country also through place-based partnerships and by making catalytic supports available. I also want to say that Cecilia is a proud NUF alum and has also served as a mentor for the National Urban Fellows. They both are deeply connected to the communities and are passionate advocates, and I'm excited to welcome them all here today. Great to see you, Ishana and Cecilia.
Thanks for having us.
It is my
I
pleasure.
should say I'm a proud NUF alumni, and I am not ashamed to say that I am from the best class, class of 2000, which every class thinks is the most competitive, which is indeed 23 years ago. Just to put it in perspective, it's been a long time, but NUF's history is long and deep. So a very proud alumni indeed.
Absolutely. Wonderful to have you both here today. I want to kick it off with one question I'd like to pose to you both. And just hearing your thoughts about this, why is this talent challenge so critical from where you sit? And how do both of your organizations address it?
Awesome. You want me to kick it off, Lisa?
That would be great. Thank you,
That's
Michelle.
how we practice this. Happy afternoon, everybody. And I am not a NUF alum, but I would like to say that I get to work with two of them at Ballmer Group. Kylie Mitchell, who runs our Detroit office for Ballmer Group, as well as Michaelia Davis, who is our national director for Black family economic mobility. So and then of course, Cecilia, so I'm always in good company, though I am not an alum myself. But yeah, great opening remarks, really sobering. It's very simple for us and for me at Ballmer Group that this work that we know is vital to advance economic mobility can't be done without really strong and good leaders. I think for us, their origin of it is that needs to be true, and we need to be we really feel strongly that the leaders that are doing this work are reflective of the populations that we are trying to serve, that we need to have the voices of those who are being most impacted also at the table developing the solutions. And I think Miguel maybe spoke to this a little bit in his opening remarks. And I can remember when I was decided to go way back many years ago to policy school, part of that, the impetus of that was my recognition and realization that so many decisions about our communities, my neighborhood, my school, were being made without anybody that looked like me at the table. And that was not okay, was egregious, and something that shouldn't happen. And I personally felt like maybe the public policy path would be a way to sort of attack that. And so, definitely that's one of the features just, of NUF's model that I very much appreciate and think is critical. The fact that people get that master's degree in policy. But that's where it starts for Ballmer Group, is having the leaders at the table who are reflective of the populations we most care about. Secondly, and not necessarily in order of priority, but maybe equally, is making sure once they're there, they're supported. I mean, that's the other thing, is that we sometimes do luck up, get the talent that's reflective, that's proximate, that can do the work, and then we don't support them in the ways that they deserve, both by the funding inequities that we talked about. They raise, BIPOC leaders, people of color, Black leaders raise less money. They have less money that's unrestricted. And so we might get them to seat, but then we abandon, we don't support, we don't give them the resources that their organizations need to innovate, to take risks. Their boards the board piece is a whole other situation we need to figure out, and they're just not set up for success. So it's finding and exposing and getting the talent to be in the seat, and then also making sure we don't abandon them once they are there. There's two distinct ways that the Ballmer Group is working on this challenge, and many more across the philanthropy, but two that I get the opportunity to lead. One is, you might have seen that last year we were able to announce a $42 million investment over 5 years in Black-led early stage organizations to help them go from startup to early scaling to proof of concept, and ideally move on the way to scale. And secondly, through our work to support the field of place-based partnerships, where I work very closely with Cecilia and spend a lot of time thinking about the ways in which we can lift up the talent that is reflective and give them the supports that they need to lead these critically important efforts about how we reduce and eliminate poverty in place. So those are the two main strategies that I'm happy to talk about today that we have led, and then there are many more talent things happening within other issue areas across the foundation as well. So I'll stop there.
Thanks, Ishana. And you should all know, Ishana and I work really closely together. I am both a fan, but we are in deep partnership together. We get to talk almost on a weekly basis on our shared work around place-based and place-based strategy and place-based partnerships. Maybe the best way to start is to share some of the intentional ways that Blue Meridian has been addressing this challenge, both internally and externally. And I'll start with saying, when we talk to leaders across the country, talent is the #1 issue that is on their mind, not just how to attract talented individuals, particularly BIPOC leaders, but also how to support them, as Ashana said, and then how to pay them what they're worth, which is often a huge disparity in our social sector community, and have them stay in the work for long term. But I'll just share with you a few data that we're particularly proud of at Blue Meridian Partners. And for those of you who don't know, Blue Meridian Partner, we are a philanthropic endeavor that's 6 years young, that was started out of the Animal Connell Park Foundation. We see ourselves as a disruptor of the philanthropic space, and I can spend more time talking about what that means. But we did a recent analysis of our investments in FY23, which just concluded. And of the $1.9 billion that we invested in social sector leaders, 75% went to what we call BIPOC-led, BIPOC-managed organizations. Of that investment, 54% of those investments were actually being led by BIPOC CEOs. So we are really proud of that data and hope to sustain that and do even better. Today in Spartanburg, South Carolina, where we've made an investment of $75 million in partnership with the Duke Endowment to a Black-led organization called the Spartanburg Academic Movement. And I share that because one of the things that Ashana and I have discovered in this work is that not only do we need to invest in BIPOC leaders, but even when we talk about the level of investment to social sector leaders, it has been like disproportionately huge disparity as it relates to our white counterparts. And I'll tell you this one story, which is Blue Meridian made an investment of $50 million to Michael McAfee at PolicyLink. And I remember calling him in tears because it was such a significant investment when he is an incredible social sector leader in this country that we should be throwing money at him at every opportunity. But when he talks about the story, he is now in the category of like a Jeffrey Canada, who was one of the first African-American leaders to receive a significant investment. And his reflection was Angela Glover Blackwell, a czar in our social sector space, never once received a phone call where she got $50 million. And it wasn't because she wasn't worth it. It was because we weren't ready to make that level of investment. I think of folks like Bob Moses, who led the Algebra Project for so many years, who didn't receive the right, was a MacArthur genius, but like didn't receive the proper investment. And so I'm sharing that with you because in Spartanburg, Dr. Russell Booker, who's an extraordinary African-American leader, for him to get a call where he got $75 million investment is like the kind of thing that Ashana and I are trying to galvanize in this country in partnership with so many of you. We are both deeply passionate about what it means to build a pipeline of leaders in this country, and also to build a pipeline of passionate leaders. The last data point that I'll just share that I'm really proud of is Blue Meridian itself has been equally intentional internally about how we are diversifying our team. So our CEO is Nancy Roof. She is a white woman, but every other chief on the team, the chief investment and impact officer, the chief investor relations officer, the chief brand officer, the chief financial officer is a leader of color. and probably one of the most brilliant leaders of color I've ever experienced in this country. So it's like the brilliance is there. I think what NUF is trying to do and investing in emerging leaders, making sure they have the right education and then supporting them along the way is the exact strategy that we want.
Wow. Such incredible work all around the country. And I know these investments that you both have made are paying off, tremendously. When we think about all of the challenges that confront us, the resources alone, the technology alone, the great ideas alone, will kind of shrivel on the vine if they don't have the right people to nurture, and care for them. So in addition to kind of the investments that you've made, maybe Shauna, can you talk about maybe some of the lessons that you've learned kind of in your early career when you were kind of also investing in talent, but also today in what are things to consider when exploring a talent investment strategy?
Absolutely. Early in my career, I was saying to some of us earlier, ran an organization 7 or 8 years. I got a call that we won $11 million one day, which nothing compared to what we can do now, but like that was huge back in 2015. I won an I3 grant. And by the time, I was telling this story the other day, by the time they took out all of the money for overhead and this and that, it was not $11 million. It was a little bit less, 9.5, maybe 9 million. So that's one thing the sector has to do better, is really start paying for that overhead and really start paying for that administrative piece of work or what have you. And then, from there, once that happened, the pressure was on, and how are you going to implement it, and how are you going to make this work? I think I was lucky that I had a great board. I was lucky that I had mentors. I was lucky that I had people I could call and say, how do I do this? So I guess when I think about some of my career leading, in the sector, and how that translates, Lisa, to what I look for now, what we're trying to figure out, as we're really trying to find a couple of different things with the investments that we make. We want to make sure we're looking at leadership development organizations that are really committed to making sure that they are serving majority, racially diverse leaders, number one. And that they are, like I said earlier, able to provide them with the supports that they need while those leaders are with them. We also think about what happens after. I think this is a thing that gets missed a lot. So, and right now what I'm talking about is like thinking about the whole suite of leadership development organizations that we invest in. So we have national urban fellows that we invest in, but we also do Public Allies, Leadership for Educational Equity, Lead for America, Govern for America. And the Highland Project is in there now. The Black Leadership Institute is in there now. So there's a whole suite and slate of talent investments that we're making. And so racially diverse obviously has to be there. The supports, what supports are they giving to the leaders while they're with them? But then what happens after? And I find that as a sector, we aren't really doing a great job of, we pay for organizations to bring in more and more leaders, but we don't pay for them to continue to support them after they have finished the program or finished the training or finished the, the skills building piece, or finished with their coaching. So I also look for and think about what the alumni piece is with the investments that we're making. And so those are a little bit of what we're looking for when we think about our investments that are helping with the leaders. And then there's another side to it that I already spoke about, but I'll say it again, which is about the, all of the pieces that you need if you're running an organization that are sort of more HR focused, that folks don't really have the capacity or the monies to focus on. So that's one of the places where Cecilia and I intersect, is like, how do these organizations get money to, what are the hiring incentives? How are you actually, what's your capacity to go out and find the racially diverse talent? How's your capacity to keep them? Do you do organizational readiness assessments? What is your culture like on the inside? So if you're going to get the folks, are they going to stay? So we're thinking about, you know, people being able to have equitable salaries and doing the comp studies. And so there's a whole space of work as well, Lisa, around what the organizations need to bring in and support the talent. And then I have a whole slate of organizations only working with leaders and thinking about what those leaders need to get. Because people often try to say, okay, I can't find. I think the leaders are there. It's also, our sector is not really good about taking care of the leader once they're there, and definitely not good about taking care of the people of color leaders, the BIPOC leaders, when they're there. And they're not set up for success. They're getting into the role, and we saw a lot of this in the pandemic, post-pandemic. Everybody wanted a person of color leader, and everyone was moving out of the way and putting in the people of color. But I sat back and I was like, they are not going to be set up for success. You have to have fundraising capacity. You have to have a board that's behind you. You have to have transition planning, succession planning. You have to have, and everybody was just like, hands up, I'm going to move out of the way and give my leadership seat to a person of color, and no talk about what that person was going to need to succeed. So I'm thinking of both sides all the time, filling the pipeline, and then how do we keep them once we do sell them on this sector and this work. I think the last thing, Cecilia touched on this, is we're in a compensation conundrum for sure. And we have to pay people what they're worth, more than what they're worth. These jobs are really hard. They're mentally taxing. If you are coming from these communities, you might also be traumatized, re-traumatized. So what are we going to do about that? And you know, the first answer, and I do think there's some obligation here, is, you know, philanthropy needs to be giving out larger grants so we can cover more of those salaries. And I think that that's part of it, but we also have to think about what's going to be sustainable and how we can think of new models for organizations, help them think about how they can, is there some earned revenue kind of streams, but we have to figure out how we're going to get ourselves out of this compensation conundrum, because we can't attract, especially young people, if we don't do that. The last thing I will say is I had the opportunity to have dinner with a young man who was at Howard, and we were talking to him about who comes to recruit at Howard. And Disney, JP Morgan Chase, all the big name companies, but we're not there. Public policy, government, nonprofits, we aren't there, and we can't compete. And so we got a lot of work to do on that front as well. So I'll stop there and let Cecilia get in on this question.
I thought you were fabulous, Shauna. I'll just add two things that I just think it's important to add. So the first one is, and Shauna's alluding to this as she's talking, but like, I think one of the things that even she and I are practicing is, when we are in the same space together, how do we support one another and lift each other up? And we are like, my success is Shauna's success. Shauna's success is my success. I am just as invested in Shauna being successful in her role and growing in her leadership role than I am when I see any other leader of color. And I just feel like we need to not only see one another, but we need to be intentional about really investing in each other's leadership and supporting one another, is one thing I'll say. And then just so you know, for Blue Meridian specifically, we ask explicitly about ready strategy and encourage ready strategy in each of the investments that we make. And annually, not only we are in conversation intentionally about our own work as an organization that we're doing, and we are still a long way to go, but also making sure that folks are doing no different. And then the last thing is, when I led a nonprofit organization, I will just tell you, the talent is there at every level. So I did community work. I would place my community leaders who have no degrees in the same boardroom as I would anyone else, and had them in the room every time there were big strategic decisions to be made. But just to say, like, talent is at every level. It's not just thinking about those that are pursuing post-secondary education, but also those that have deep community knowledge and expertise and experience that can contribute to how we are advancing social and economic mobility in this country, which is a thing that Ashana and I work a lot on.
Thank you so much. So many gems there. I just love how expansively you're thinking about this, from not just preparing the pipeline, right, but preparing the organizations to receive the talent, but also realizing the human toll and the human dimensions of leading organizations is very personal, very challenging work. And what is the right circumstances that we can create to sustain leaders in that context? And so I want to turn to Cecilia and ask you, just for a personal experience as kind of a NUF fellow, kind of how has NUF prepared you for this work, and kind of what has the leadership journey and the experience of going through the program, has that brought together that community, the resources, the mentoring, all the elements to help you in your way?
Yeah, you're making me think 23 years back, but I had an incredibly meaningful NUF experience. I got assigned to the New York City Board of Education, which is the first time that NUF was a part of the Board of Education. This was Giuliani was the mayor, and Rudy Crew, for those of you who've been in the education sector, was the chancellor of New York City Public School, and I was assigned to Dr. Irving Hamer, who was the borough representative at the time, a Harvard-educated and African-American, a brilliant man. And our relationship spanned until he passed away. So I had a profound experience as an NUF working as a special assistant to a member of the Board of Education at the policy level. I got hired and remained with him until the board was turned into a mayoral agency. And 20 years later, I was one of the 7 people in the room when he passed away. So it was a very impactful relationship that I had with someone who I considered a dear friend and mentor. And that's the thing about NUF, you don't know what you're going to find and discover, but because of that profound experience, it put me in rooms early on in my career that I don't think I would have ever been in. And I grew up, I'm of Dominican heritage. I'm from a family my mom is the youngest of 12 kids. She has a 3rd grade education and immigrated to this country. So my story is quite remarkable. I'm sure it's quite very similar to all of you, but I've always been fascinated by how we eliminate luck from the equation of lifting people out of poverty and lifting community out of poverty. And so I had a profound, I think NUF opened doors for me that I would have never had a chance to enter. And then I've been really fortunate to find mentors along the way at every level who just saw something in me and elevated me and gave me lots of opportunities early on. And I'll just say, I have worked my butt off for each one, knowing how few of us get that opportunity and wanting to show up in the way that would lift others. So I think I really fundamentally believe that if I'm going to be at the table, I need to be a voice for those that are not, and that I have a responsibility to make sure that many more are at the table.
Truly are remarkable, Cecilia. Thank you for all that you do. And Ashana, you have offered so many incredible insights. We do have an opportunity to hear from other colleagues who are joining us today. So feel free, if you have questions, you can unmute yourself, you can raise your hand, you can drop them in the chat. I'd also wanted to kind of acknowledge here in the room another one of our partners from Comcast, Tracy Henderson, who has also had the experience of making significant investments in our work, as well as hosting a fellow and then sponsoring a fellow at one of their grantee organizations. And Tracy, I wonder if you could kind of weigh in here on anything that you heard that kind of resonated with your experience, kind of writ large and specifically with NUF.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for hosting this and inviting me to the table. Super impressed by the speaker so far. So I don't know how helpful I will be here, but from my own experience, I actually come from the public health sector and matriculated over to corporate after graduate school. So I started out kind of government and then nonprofit, and then here I am. But I would say that NUF has been a great partner. I actually mentored one of the fellows last year, and we had two here at Comcast NBC Universal here in Philadelphia. And this year we sponsored two of our nonprofit partners. So we are deeply invested and understand the importance of proximate leaders, and something that we've done over the past few years. As you all know, many corporations made commitments to social justice after the murder of George Floyd, and we were among them. We fulfilled ours. It was $100 million over 3 years. And a part of that was investing in organizations like NUF. Another one is Surge Institute, mentoring education leaders. Another is Echoing Green, making significant investment in Echoing Green and their social innovation entrepreneurs, if you will. And so I would say that proximate leaders are very important to our work. We did our own back of the napkin math on, how our own giving was looking. And we were pleasantly surprised at the percentage of, I won't share it because my comms people will slap me on the hand, but how much of our giving was to BIPOC leaders serving, BIPOC constituencies. So we were proud of that because that's something that's happened over the past few years. I guess the ascendancy of that. And so my personal experience, I was thinking one of the things that we could think about is some of the folks in my seat where there's not many working in corporate, working in philanthropy, but there are folks that we should be transitioning to the social sector when they kind of reach a certain level or peak in their career in corporate America, that we can think about transitioning to social impact outside of corporations. But to Ashana's point, I think that salary is going to be an issue. And so if we want this talent, we really have to think through, how do we pay for it? How do we support it? I think all of the things that you all said. What I love about NUF is they think about all of that with their fellows. So it's about housing, healthcare, mental health support. Like, we have to do all of that for these leaders. So little bit of a ramble, but I think the work that NUF is doing is incredible. We're supportive of it. We see the need for it, and we're trying to emulate it in other parts of our grant making, looking at the investments more holistically, multi-year grants, allowing for supports opposed to programmatic only, and looking at those outcomes that way.
So much, Tracy. And our fellows have had an amazing experience seeing kind of the corporate philanthropy side. So thank you for your leadership there.
Absolutely.
Yes. I believe someone else was coming off of mute, and I hope I didn't cut you off.
I came off of mute, but I want to give someone else an opportunity if there are other comments or thoughts. Okay. Well, I'll just keep talking. Something that Cecilia said sparked just, this notion of how we eliminate luck from the equation when we talk about the trajectory of people's lives. And yeah, I think this conversation and many others, but this conversation in this moment is really making me think about how can we just scale the NUFs of the world. I mean, the thing is, there's so many people don't know that NUF exists. And at the same time, you wouldn't want to, you're not big, like if we wanted to spread it all over, then we'd get so much attention, and then we wouldn't be able to fulfill enough of the demand. So I think that I also learned and heard recently that, I don't know if people know the PPIA program, I think formerly known as the Woodrow Wilson program, which gave full rides to public policy schools for minorities, is threatened falling to the wayside as well. So there are a number of these pathways programs for our sector that are very challenged at the moment. So, us thinking about how we come together to scale them, and maybe that's something we could think about collectively, because not to mention the silver tsunami happening in government and the whole aging, that is a whole other piece of this, if you think about the social sector, including government as well. And I think it's just time to really think about how we can put some bigger dollars, maybe collectively, in so that it is not just only a few who can take advantage of these kinds of programs.
Yeah, thank you for saying that, Ashana. I think you're so right. When we think about scale, a lot of our partners are thinking about volume. I think about kind of increasing the quality, right? And really deepening the leadership supports, not just for like an initial journey, but as Ashana alluded to, across the leadership lifespan, right? At every, step in your career, there are different needs there. We want to retool, have these communities of support, because it can be a very challenging, lonely journey as a nonprofit executive. And having the resource support, but also the communal support, the philanthropic support, the support from the board, all of that is critical to success. I want to acknowledge that Gary Bagley from our board has joined us. Hi, Gary, so glad you could make it. I don't know if you wanted to hop in with a comment.
First of all, hello, and I'm sorry I needed to be late for this today. And so do forgive me if I'm repeating things that have already been said. But I will say, one thing we've been thinking about as a board, which is, I think, incredibly important and relevant to this conversation, is the amount of support that the organization provides to fellows, before that fellowship, right? Before they step in, there's time there, there's time after, they're supporting an alumni network. And we're so aware of how much more support we could be offering. And frankly, thinking about, and now this is me as the development committee chair, but just thinking about how do you raise, the resources to really provide the depth of experience that every fellow deserves and needs at this step in their journey. But then how do we, in a world of scale, right, which is incredibly important, right? We want to scale everything. How do we think about building a model where we can also be part of scaling a bigger movement that NUF is part of? I think is something that we're thinking about very deeply, as a board. And as your comments and your wonderful remarks come in, it has that resonating for me to think about how do we, from a governance perspective, really step up and provide the, sort of, as I said before, that full base of support that someone deserves and needs. So I'm really grateful for hearing your thoughts on this, because it's very motivating for me as a board member.
Thank you so much, Gary, and for your leadership on our board. And I think the point you made about scale of how NUF can kind of deepen, our work, but also be a part of a broader movement are really critical. And so what I'll share just in closing is just a little bit about our approach. So you'll understand the full context of kind of the combination of things that we believe fellows need, our leaders need, in order to be successful. right? Not everyone, as Cecilia mentioned, needs a degree, but we do know that it can be very valuable to develop those skills, get that knowledge base, particularly focus in public policy. And so our fellows earn a fully funded master's degree from Georgetown University in policy management. That's paired with hands-on practical experience at one of our partner organizations. And so, as we mentioned, we have a few of the partners on the call today, but we know that it's important to not just see what the theory says, but what happens in real life. And then they also have a mentor who is really there to help them negotiate the difference between the theory and the practice, that providing that coaching to help them build their leadership muscles and their own unique leadership approach. Financial support, as we know, is very critical. We look for fellows who are committed to racial equity and social justice, and oftentimes they come from backgrounds that are underfunded. And so really making sure that it can be a sustainable, supportive experience for them, once they have, since they're already kind of professionals in their career, they're not right out of college, right? Our focus as well is on racial equity. And we talked about how important community is. We don't think leadership is a solo journey. And we know that having the community of people in a cohort to help you walk through a leadership journey together will be important, not just for our fellowship, but these are lifelong relationships that will serve our fellows and our alumni well. So in addition, because of all of these pieces, we make these deep investments and we know that they make an impact. And when we think about right here in New York City, we have tremendous examples of alumni who are changing the game. In nonprofits, in government, in foundations, in philanthropy and education. I just want to brag for a moment about NUF is responsible, or at least can claim the first, second, and third AAPI representative to New York State Assembly, the first Latina City Council chair, and numerous leaders and organizations around across the social sector. And it's not just at the top of the organizations that we want to attend to. It's also thinking about at every level of the organization, making sure that we have well-prepared folks who bring a rich perspective, who are proximate to the communities from which the work is focused and are grounded in a set of principles and values around service and equity. And so this work is incredibly valuable. And in just closing, what I'd like to say is that I want to underscore Miguel's point about the urgency of this moment, right? We know that the work, the challenges are ever increasing, and that our people need to be prepared to respond. That neither community level nor systems level change can be effective without making these investments in the work. And a concerted effort and strategic investments, as Ishana and as Cecilia have mentioned, are incredibly vital for this work. And so they need to be, again, deep and wide and long-term to be able to do that. And so I just want to leave you with a few things that would be important for us to consider as potential partners in this work is how do we sustain this important work for another 50 years? Are there ways that we can go deeper in this support? We talk about equity and sustainability and making sure that it is a well-supported journey for our fellows. And then we also talked about scaling impact, right? We have over 2,000 organizations for both NUF as well as the sector more broadly. How do we make sure that we can continue to see the return on these investments in a more meaningful and a sustained way over time? So I'd like to offer 3 invitations to start a conversation, right, about how we can partner to invest in the future of social sector leadership. How can we meet and be introduced to other philanthropic partners who may also be interested in this work and have this conversation, but then also to challenge you to consider how talent investments fit into your funding priorities, and how the work that you're doing, whether it's in health or it's in education or the arts, right? Is there a talent strategy that's attached to it? And how can we ensure that we're making those investments, not just in the program, but in the people who are responsible for driving the mission? So I so appreciate your time. And for those of us, I just want to say one last thing, who are invested in a more equitable world. This is not just a great opportunity, right? But it's also a responsibility for us being in a place where we've been able to get into these rooms, and the doors that have been opened to us. How do we make sure that these doors remain open? So I want to take this moment to thank again Ishana and Cecilia for just really the brilliant work, for the heart and the thought and the care that they put into this work, and the amazing ways in which they share their successes, for joining us today. And I'd also like to turn it over to Don to provide a few closing remarks.
Thanks. Very quickly, before I launch into last thoughts, any final questions for our speakers, for Dr. Rawlings or the board members? Any final questions from folks? Okay, if you are curious to learn more, you know where to go. Dr. Rawlings and the wonderful staff are ready to assist. I just want to build on the nuggets that Lisa left us with, which are, I'll just underscore one, which is the title of this briefing was really about how to support talent and representation at a time of racial regression. We have to remember that there's a frontal assault on racial representation in all sectors, and they're really going for broke. And we have to find ways to invest in not just, what NUF has been doing for over a half century, but also do it even more forthrightly and affirmatively, and to know that mentoring and supporting leadership development and growth is part of the work. I'll leave you with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Don, and thank you, Ishana and Cecilia, Gary, Miguel, and Tracy, and all of you have joined us today. It's lovely to have this conversation, and look forward to being in touch with you all.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.